So as Rita mentioned, we are closing in rapidly on the holiday season. Thanksgiving is this week, and followed by about 5 weeks of cheerful time with friends and family. And unfortunately for some people, holidays are also a month of rampant consumerism and runaway stress. So, and I'm already hearing from people that given the current political and social climate, they expect this holiday season to be more stressful than usual. Heard a woman talking a few days ago about her relationship with her mother, who had supported the other candidate. I don't know which the other one was in that particular case, but she hadn't talked to her since the election. And she was reluctant to. She said she wasn't sure she could get through a conversation without mentioning the elephant in the room. I think if there's an elephant in the room, you really don't need to say much about that.
No.
But I did know what she meant. And I know people who've been friends for a long time who aren't speaking, and I think that's sad. And I have one friend, a really good guy that I like a lot, who decided that his role in life for some indefinite period of time is to be angry. And I understand his point of view, but to just be angry and oppositional, he's already making himself miserable, and it's not going to get any better. So I suspect that in the near future, we'll be spending time in various forms of activism and preservation. But in the next several weeks, we may want to navigate our way around those elephants in the interests of friendship and family unity. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about ways that during the holidays we can kind of use this special time of year to focus on spiritual development. And the fact that this is a challenging time and a challenging environment might actually be an opportunity to grow a little bit more. I read something by Tanasaru Bhikkhu last week, who's a teacher that I like a lot, and I thought I would share this with you. And he was talking in this particular essay about being compassionate, but he starts out pointing out that the main aspect of the Buddha's teachings is that the Buddha identified, as he put it, the basis for all of our good and skillful qualities as heedfulness, not as innate goodness or compassion, but heedfulness. In other words, good actions require us to pay close attention. So Tam Jeff says to recognize that there are dangers both within and without, that your actions can make the difference between suffering from dangers and not suffering. This is the heedfulness that makes us generous, wise, and kind. We're kind not because we're innately kind. In fact, our minds are so quick to change that they're not innately anything. But if we're heedful, we're kind not only when others are kind to us, we're kind because we see that kindness is the safest course of action, even in the face of the unkindness of others. And he says this is why the Buddha told his monks when they were ready to go out into the wilderness and face some of the dangers there. He says that way they could learn to bring out their best qualities, even when confronted with the worst that the wilderness had to offer. Some of the most moving stories from the Pali Canon are about monks in the wilds who discovered, in the face of hunger, illness, and dangers from fierce animals, that the best way to keep their minds safe was to take refuge in the holy life. So there's a lot of things that we could do that fall under headings like religion and spirituality. When we come here, we sing together and we read from inspirational literature and scriptures and so on. If you went to an Asian Buddhist temple today, you might be chanting and reciting sutras and contemplations or meditating. And these are all good ways to focus individually on our higher spiritual purpose and to come together as a group. But there are two things that the Buddha encouraged us to do that we could maybe see as our gifts to the world around us this holiday season. And these particular gifts, kindness and gratitude, won't cost us anything. But as a result of giving them, we receive spiritual health that is really priceless. We tend to think kindness and gratitude as opposite things. We give acts of kindness, we're grateful for kindness as we receive, but they really are mutually supportive. Kindness tends to lead to gratitude and vice versa. I think a lot of us too kind of seem to view these things as characteristics. We might think of someone as being a kind person or a grateful person, having a kind state of mind. But I think we can break them down a little bit and make them useful. I saw a definition for gratitude recently that I really liked. It was by a psychologist, and he called it a feeling of reverence for something given. It's very much like the word the Buddha used for gratitude, which is a Pali word that meant something like knowing what has been done. So in other words, it's when thanks to someone else, something good happens that we benefit from. There's a lot of psychologists who study things like that and say that gratitude's benefits include increased optimism, life satisfaction, happiness, and less envy, possessiveness, anxiety, and depression. So a lot of the emotions that we associate with happiness and well-being we can get from gratitude, and we'll get fewer of the emotions that we associate with unhappiness and discontent. And there's a couple of kinds of gratitude. There's sort of the momentary feeling that we get when something benefits us, and then there's sort of a long-term mindset where we see that life and everything in it is a gift. And then in contrast, ungrateful people will see life as a burden, and they focus on the negative and see everything they don't have instead of what they do. So if we start to view life as a gift, even in troubled times, we'll experience a better sense of cooperation, compassion for others, happier relationships. Doing that makes people more pro-social, reduces general feelings of stress. And because we're directing our attention at something outside of ourselves, it increases our awareness of our interdependency. So if gratitude is the awareness that we've received a gift of some kind, if you can be grateful, then you're also more likely to recognize the value of giving. And so if you're grateful, you're more likely to be kind. So as you know, Buddhist practice incorporates the idea that positive actions lead to positive results and negative actions lead to negative results. So the effects of our action can include consequences that come to us from outside. If I go to work, I'm going to get paid. If I work hard, I might get a promotion. If you smile at somebody, you're likely to get a smile in return. But those effects also include consequences on the nature of our mind itself. So, in other words, in Buddhist terms, action leaves kind of a residue on the mind. So we become spiritually and psychologically kind of worse off if we engage in negative patterns of action, because it creates negative patterns of thinking. You probably know somebody that you describe as negative. People who always seem to find a reason to complain about somebody or something. You could develop that skill if you wanted to. But it would probably make you a pretty unhappy person. So you can develop the opposite skill of that really by looking for reasons to be grateful and then by expressing kindness. The Buddha considered kindness, specifically the practice of sharing with others, to be essential to spiritual practice. He said, if beings knew the benefit of giving, they would not eat without having given. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared. And this isn't just true of Buddhism. All major religions consider kindness to be a virtue. And in the past several decades, researchers in the fields of social and positive and evolutionary psychology have confirmed that kindness is not just useful as a spiritual skill, but it contributes to our mental and physical well-being. And they're looking not so much at things like spiritual liberation as much as they look at things like what makes people happy and healthy. But they agree that kindness has great benefits for the well-being of individuals and societies. When it comes to what makes us happy, there's a strong genetic component of that. There's life circumstances, and then there's our intentional actions. All three of those things kind of contribute to whether you're going to be happy or unhappy. Fortunately, circumstances is actually a fairly small factor in that. The biggest factor is your intentional actions. So the things over which you have the most control actually exert the most influence over whether you're happy or not. By happy, by the way, I don't mean that you feel good all the time. We don't really want that. If the government was to collectively lose its mind and decide to start suspending civil rights or something, we wouldn't want to feel okay about that. I need your help with the next part. I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this or not. I need everybody to smile really big and to keep smiling. This week I said goodbye to my dog.
Oh.
We were really close, and I'm going to miss him. And I don't want to feel okay about that. I want to be sad. Mm-hmm. I don't like feeling sad. But we had a really good time together, and there's a loss. And it reminds me of a poem by Issa, a famous Japanese poet, who had just lost his daughter. And he wrote, "This dewdrop world is a dewdrop world, and yet, and yet." Those yets are tough. But if we make ourselves kind, grateful, happy people, we develop spiritual resilience that allows us to weather tough times. And one way to do that is by practicing kindness. Deliberately practicing kindness is a direct route to happiness. We all have a capacity for it, but we don't always develop that capacity. But fortunately, kindness is pretty easy to develop. I know you're pretty kind to people, but we can all get into our habits. The easy way to be kinder is to do acts of kindness. That doesn't mean that you have to write big checks or give expensive gifts. The Buddha said, even if somebody just rinses out a bowl and dumps the water with the leavings into a pond, thinking, may whatever beings live in this water benefit from this. That is an act of kindness that results in spiritual wealth. So if we give mindfully and we sincerely want the recipient to benefit from the gift, we're going to be happier. You have some opportunities to practice some things that won't cost you anything. And I hope that you'll take those things and pay them forward to others. And the interesting irony is that the more you pay it out, the more you get it back. Even to give a family member or a friend freedom from your resentment is a gift. And in the process of giving someone friendliness instead of hostility, you give yourself relief from maintaining that animosity, which uses up a lot of energy. Every week I send out meeting notices for our meetings in DeLand. And on that reminder, I always put a short reading that kind of relates to what I'm going to talk about that night, just a paragraph or two. And it happened that before the election, I sent out the notice for that Wednesday's meeting. And I included a paragraph from an essay by a woman named Aya Kema called What Love Is. And I'm going to share it with you because it turned out to be very appropriate considering the way people were feeling when they came to the meeting on Wednesday. So here's what she wrote. She said, disliking others is too easy. Anybody can do it and justify it because, of course, people are often not very bright and they don't act the way we'd like them to act. But disliking makes grooves in the heart, and it becomes easier and easier to fall into these grooves. We not only dislike others, but also ourselves. If one loves oneself, it's easier to love others, which is why we always start loving kindness meditations like the one we did earlier, with the focus on ourselves. That's not egocentricity. If we don't like ourselves because we have faults, or if we have made mistakes, we will transfer that dislike to others and judge them accordingly. We're not here to be judge and jury. First of all, we don't have the qualifications. It's also a very unsatisfactory job, doesn't pay, and tends to make people unhappy. Ayakema was a Buddhist nun in the Sri Lankan order, but she was born in Germany, in Berlin, to Jewish parents in 1923. So she wasn't quite in her teens as Hitler came to power. And in 1938, she escaped Germany, ended up in Scotland with a bunch of children. And then a couple of years later, she was reunited in China with her parents. And then not long after that, her family was rounded up and put into a Japanese prisoner of war camp where her father died. So I think if a person can make it through what she went through without, as she put it, getting stuck in the grooves worn into your heart by anger, then we should be able to survive the holidays. And we could probably survive a few years under a deeply flawed president. A couple of days after the election, Reverend Koyo Kabose, who heads up Bright Dawn, sent out an email to all the ministers and talking about turning more sincerely to the Dharma during troubled times. And he said that the teaching that always helped him the most was to remember that when something bad happens, the bad thing that happens isn't the problem. The problem is how we deal with it. So we should look for answers within, not outside ourselves. But that doesn't mean we just go on as if nothing happened. It means we don't get caught up in right, wrong, fair, unfair, win, lose. If we mentally fight against what happened, he said, we make ourselves into a victim, and being a victim leads to feelings of powerlessness and maybe even hopelessness. But if we can recognize that this is what happened, and then say, well, what can I do about it? What's important to preserve? What's important to protect? Then that's very empowering. We start looking at ways that we can act productively. So I can't tell you what you need to do or should do, and I'm not going to ask you how you voted, and you deserve my compassion no matter what. But, just be careful. If you're going to march in the streets, be careful to observe your vows to not cause harm with your actions of body, speech, or mind. But no matter what, I suggest that you look for opportunities to be kind. Be kind to one another in your spiritual community. Be kind to your acquaintances, even if they voted differently from you. And rather than offering arguments, look for opportunities to offer support and friendship. As I look back over my life, I can't recall ever regretting giving someone a kindness. But I certainly have regrets about unkindnesses. It seems to me sometimes that the effect of an unkind act on the mind is to smolder like an ember in the ashes, just waiting to burst into flame as soon as it's exposed. Japanese Zen master Soen Nakagawa Roshi once had a famous conversation with a student who came to him and was having difficulty with his meditation practice. And he said, "Master, I'm so discouraged. What can I do?" And Soen Roshi just said, "Encourage others." So at times like these, when I'm confused, in danger of becoming discouraged, I use that as my turning phrase. Encourage others. And I suggest that you try it. Take those practices that Rita gave you and see if you don't experience spiritual rewards and greater happiness as a result of passing out kindness. Thank you for your attention.